Awesome. All right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys having me. My name is Doug Moore. I am a fantasy football writer for Gridiron Experts and also for Pro Football Network. A little bit about myself. With Gridiron Experts, I focus a little bit on both dynasty and redraft, and over at Pro Football Network, more at um, analytics in regards to redraft, in regards to dynasty. My apologies. So I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you guys having me. Uh, it's nice to be called an expert at something, so I appreciate it, and looking forward to answering you guys' questions. Hopefully, help you guys as we get closer and closer to fantasy football season, which is really right around the corner at this point. So, just taking a look. Obviously, you guys gave me some great questions, and I'll try to tackle them all as well as I can and get through all of them the best I can as well. So, don't be afraid to send me any more questions if you do have them. But just taking a look. Starting off. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about rookies. Obviously, are a huge hot button topic every year. And Steven Sims had sent over a question about crowded backfields with rookies in them. So, for example, he talked about Green Bay with Aaron Jones, already the starter there, but then the Packers go and they draft A.J. Dillon. I'm a BC fan, so go A.J. Dillon. But A.J. Dillon being drafted there, Keyshawn Vaughn drafted to the Buccaneers, J.K. Dobbins to the Ravens, Cam Akers to the Rams, and another good one would be DeAndre Swift to Detroit. Talking a little about that, obviously, it sort of muddies things a little bit for 2020, but some situations are a little bit different than others, where there's some guys that I think could really make an impact in year one versus some that might be longer term plays in like Dynasty, for example. The one that sticks out to me the most is DeAndre Swift with Detroit. Long time there was talk about the Lions just didn't like running the ball. For the longest time they didn't have a 100-yard rusher and whatnot. But that seemed to change a little bit last season, where Kerryon Johnson, highly touted, a second round pick a couple years ago, came in. He started to take over and be the lead back. Got hurt, and it was sort of just a mix of a whole bunch of different guys, both Scarborough and Ty Johnson and whatnot last season. Draft, one of the top running back prospects in this past draft with DeAndre Swift. And so now with Kerryon Johnson healthy and DeAndre Swift, for example, how does that sort of make it look? And I think DeAndre Swift can come in, and I think he's a guy who can make the biggest impact in year one. I think of those higher profile players. So, I think he's a guy that can come in. I think at very least you'll see week one sort of a 50-50. And the interesting thing I think will be third down and who gets more targets, because I think both of these guys are capable of catching the ball and being looked at on third downs on those pass plays. But I think the edge would go to Swift a little bit. Swift, he was arguably one of the best, if not the best, receiving backs, in this draft class. And, coming into a situation where you look at the Lions, they get Matt Stafford back, and, they have Kenny Golladay, they have Marvin Jones, who struggled to stay healthy, and then you have Hawkinson as well, who hopefully will take a jump, but tight ends take a little bit longer to sort of get into their own. So I think Swift is a guy that can really step up. A.J. Dillon, he's going to be more of a 2021 play. I think Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones are both free agents after the season. So I think this is more of a long-term play, and it just A.J. Dillon doesn't come in and have a clear role. He may be a goal line back, but we saw Aaron Jones do really well when it came to getting across the goal line. He was one of the top players in regards to offensive touchdowns. So that'll be interesting to see. And then you have a guy like J.K. Dobbins coming into the Ravens, where they're incredible when it comes to running the ball, between scheming, between obviously Lamar Jackson and whatnot. But I guess my concern is that you have Mark Ingram, who still was a workhorse when he was running, but then you also have Lamar Jackson, who ran for over 1,000 yards last year. So that's unheard of, really, for many quarterbacks nowadays. So I think J.K. Dobbins is a guy that ultimately maybe in the long term will be the best play, because I think because of the team and just how much of a force they are with running the ball. And even when they're down, they still run the ball a lot, which in game script you don't typically see that. I think he's a good long-term play. But I think DeAndre Swift is a guy for 2020 for redraft is going to be a guy to look at. The Rams, they're tough to figure out. Could they go with some 4 split timeshare between, Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, John Kelly? Perhaps. I mean, Cam Akers is a guy I wasn't as high on, but obviously a good prospect. And I think this is a Rams team that's going to be passing the ball a lot, just as they've always been. And so I think it's tough to sort of rely on him as like an RB2 in year one in 2020. But those are sort of what I see. And Keyshawn Vaughn is just a muddled mess in Tampa Bay. Obviously, he was, he had COVID, but it sounds like he's on his way to recovering, which is great to see. But you have all this talk about Ronald Jones, and they brought in LaShawn McCoy, and it just seems like it's a mess. Ronald Jones, even when he was the starter, after Bruce Arians said that last season, I think his snap share was around like 50% anyway. So even if Vaughn were to be the starter, I just don't see him being on the field a lot. And the Buccaneers have no shortage of people to throw to. With Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin, with Bob Gronkowski, OJ Howard, Cameron Brate, and stuff like that. So I don't have high hopes for Keyshawn Vaughn. Maybe things will clear up, but I think it's more of a situation where at his ADP, I'm sort of holding off on that. But Swift is probably the guy I think as a rookie can probably make the biggest impact. And then you obviously have Indianapolis as well, but Marlon Mack didn't have a bad season either. And then you have Nyheim Hines, who is a really good receiving back and was really efficient when he had the ball. Even Jordan Wilkins too. So that'll depend. I mean, they have a terrific offensive line, and they have a coach who is able to scheme well. So Jonathan Taylor is another guy. I'd probably have him ahead of a guy like J.K. Dobbins, but still behind a guy like DeAndre Swift, where there's not as much competition, especially with Marlon Mack being in a contract year. Some players get motivated to sort of do a little bit better. So I would probably see it as like a Swift, Taylor, Dobbins sort of ranking in year one. Looking at some of the other ones, question about Baker Mayfield getting slept on. Obviously, he was a huge disappointment in year 2 after coming out strong as a rookie. And part of that is based off of, the offensive scheming. There was all the reports of just dysfunction when it came to Todd Monken and going with, weekly game plans and whatnot. I think that, we saw something like, they had like 15 design plays and the rest was just sort of put together, scrapbook or, just whatever. So I think that's part of it. And obviously their offensive line, their tackles were bad. They had poor offensive line for the most part, besides, 1 or 2 guys. So I think, you come in, you bring in a guy like Jack Conklin and, they make a huge investment with, a new tackle in the first round. That's going to be big. I think it is. And, they obviously have a coach who, comes in and, he's known for his offensive scheming. So I think that will also help. So I think, overall, I think Baker Mayfield is definitely going to improve upon what he did last year. And then the other part too is you had a guy like Odell Beckham in his first season who, he didn't have a bad season, but compared to his standards, he performed poorly. But he was also hurt too. So hopefully he'll be healthy. I think a big thing will depend on Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry, he had that hip surgery in the offseason, and what does that look like? Is he going to be ready week 1? Because their wide receiver depth is kind of shaky behind, Odell and Jarvis Landry. They have Donovan Peoples-Jones, but he was a guy who didn't really produce a whole lot in college, even though he's super athletic and had a great athletic profile. He didn't really do a whole lot with his time at Michigan, so it's kind of tough to rely on him. They did bring in a guy like Austin Hooper, though, who they made him, I think, the highest paid tight end in football. But what he did well last season is when he was on the field, but he also dealt with injuries. And he sort of had like a 1-year breakout. He's always one of those guys that's like, he's going to break out this year and this year, but didn't really until last year, but then he got hurt. So you're hoping on a guy like him staying healthy. But I think overall Baker Mayfield is absolutely put in a much better situation. And I think he's definitely in a spot where he can definitely go and, be a QB1. I really think he has the potential to do that with all the pieces around him. I know they said that last year, but he really has his situation improved. And I think he's just got a little more stability there too, which is never going to be a bad thing. I see a question about, the Dolphins backfield. And obviously their sort of backfield has changed a lot in the past year. You had a guy like Kenyon Drake last year. You had Kalen Balaj, who I know the guy who owns Matt Canada, who owns Pro Football Network. I'm not going to say too much negative about him, but their situations changed a lot. Drake's with the Cardinals now. Balaj is still there, but he's not really a guy that's really going to be focused on a lot. They brought in Jordan Howard over the off a short-term contract. And he did well with Philadelphia last year until he got hurt, and then Miles Sanders really broke out. And then they trade for a guy like Matt Breida, who's always been he's a very fast guy, very speedy. He's always been a guy that's been pretty efficient, but he's dealt with a lot of injuries himself. And I think with the opt-outs, just as a whole, as a wide open or like a grander scale of things, with the opt-outs that we saw recently with the Dolphins, Albert Wilson, Allen Hurns, more depth guys, yes, but these are still targets up for grabs. So I think the general consensus is that Jordan Howard is going to be the guy you sort of see on those, first and second downs, and Matt Breida is going to be the guy that sprinkles in, sort of a change of pace when it comes to the carries, but he's going to be the guy to look at on third down when it comes to running backs out of the backfield. And I really think there's an opportunity for Matt Breida to really come in and be able to make a bigger impact than people expect, because there's just you have Devontae Parker, who did really well last season when Preston Williams went down. He performed like a number one, which is what he was drafted as years ago, and he got a big extension for it. Preston Williams hopefully will be ready week one. We've seen reports over the last couple of days that they're optimistic he will be. So that'll be interesting to watch. And then Mike Gesicki, who's he had a great season last year. He was a guy that came out of Penn State, highly athletic, a lot of high hopes. Guys do take typically longer to sort of be able to come into their own, as I mentioned with Hawkinson. So, I who Gesicki is going to take another step forward and be able to be at least the number one guy that you look at in the red zone. And I think there's going to be targets up for grabs, and if you're looking at it that way, I think Breida is the guy you look at. So I think considering their ADPs and whatnot. They're actually right next to each other from what it looks like, from what I'm looking at. So it's really just, I think, comes down to the scoring format. I think if you're in a PPR, even a half PPR, I think Breida is the play. But if it's a non-PPR, then I think Howard is probably the safer play. I think Howard will be the safer one, but you're going to see a lot more risk versus reward with Breida, just between, health and just, him being that sort of player as we've seen. So that's the way I sort of see it. And obviously they mentioned with that person asked about opt-outs and whatnot. Going back to what I said, there's guys that can go and get those targets that can do well with them. It's just going to be a matter of health. Preston Williams was a huge difference maker in his first season. So if he's healthy, I think you'll see a 1A, 1B situation at wide receiver with Parker and Williams. And then Gesicki, I think, is a guy you look at over the middle. He's the number one red zone target. And then you have a guy like Matt Breida who, is a guy that you can trust out of the backfield and whatnot. So I know that looking here, you're asking me about start one, sit one, cut one. DJ Moore, Juju, AJ Brown. There's a lot of people that are down on AJ Brown. His what he did last year towards the end of the season was terrific, but is it sustainable in such a run-heavy offense? I tend to believe that that's sort of overblown a little bit. Yeah, in the postseason and whatnot, you saw them, run the ball a lot, and they ran with Henry at running back, and Ryan Tannehill didn't have to do a whole lot. I tend to believe that's overblown a little bit. I don't think you're going to see a situation where Ryan Tannehill has 100 yards passing and Derrick Henry has 30 touches. I don't see that being the situation. I think A.J. Brown can be a true number one. He can be. He showed he can be. And what it's going to be is that can they get another guy who can take up some of this, this attention on defense? Corey Davis is a guy that some people have always been hoping for because he showed well, and maybe he's the Devontae Parker this year. So A.J. Brown, I think if you can get some pressure off of him, whether it be Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, who's an often forgotten guy, but he got a decent contract last year. Jonnu Smith, a popular breakout guy. if they can sort of get pressure off of AJ Brown, I really think he can perform close to what he was doing, where he was, I think a mid-tier wide receiver one. That's sort of where he was trending. DJ Moore is a guy that I like long term. It's just really tough to see what he can do because you have a QB that comes in, Teddy Bridgewater, who he did well last year, but how much of that was the system? And is he a guy that can really keep up the volume passing? But then you also look at what they had last year, and this is a clear improvement. I get that. But you talk about Curtis Samuel, who is a guy that, he can get, targets, he can carry the ball and whatnot. Then you bring in a guy like Robbie Anderson, who's the deep threat. He's going to be a guy you look at down the field. And then Ian Thomas, another guy. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Christian McCaffrey. Are we going to see him catch 100 passes again this year? I don't think so. Could you see him with 80, 85 catches? Absolutely. So it's going to be a lot of different pieces that you're working with. A team that's going to have to pass a lot because their defense is atrocious. So, and then you talk about Juju as well. Juju is a huge hype guy as well, who did really well his first couple seasons. Then obviously was similar to DJ Brown last season, had the QB injury, and they had that, and Juju dealt with injuries. But I think part of it too is Juju did a whole lot when he wasn't the 1A. He was the 1B to Antonio Brown. So what can he really do as the number one? He's still, I think, 23 years old coming into the last year of his deal. So obviously, as I mentioned before, players sometimes do better in their contract seasons. So I would personally see it as right now, probably AJ Brown, Juju, and then DJ Moore. Again, I like all three of them. I do. I just have a lot of questions about what the Panthers offense is going to look like and sort of how targets are spaced out with you have a guy like Christian McCaffrey and then you go and you sign a guy like Robbie Anderson, cutting into what DJ Moore was already getting. What second year letdown are you willing to take a chance on? Isabella, Arcega-Whiteside, or Miles Boykin? For me, I'm going to go with a guy that maybe people don't often expect. I'm going to say Arcega-Whiteside. And the reason for that is despite all the injuries that the Eagles had last season when it came to their wide receiver and who they were putting on the field, I know that Arcega-Whiteside didn't do a whole lot with that. I get that. But I really think, especially with I think better targets around him that sort of helped him and another year in that playbook, I think is going to be beneficial to him. Plus, I think he has the easiest opportunity. I think he has the easiest path towards targets. Isabella is a guy that you didn't see a whole lot with him. He made some home run plays, but he didn't get the ball a whole lot. You had Christian Kirk, you had Kenyon Drake towards the end of the season, you have Larry Fitz. But then they go and they add a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to command 140, 150, 160 targets. He's just going to. So that's already cutting into more of what Isabella could be getting. So I like him a lot, but it's really tough to trust him. And then Boykin, we talked about it earlier. He's on a run-heavy offense, regardless of how the game is going. And they just drafted two other guys at wide receiver this year in the third and the fifth round on top of Boykin. And then they obviously have Marquise Brown as well, who, he's kind of a post-hype guy. He had a really great week 1 and week 2 and then sort of fell off a little bit. It's inconsistent. I just don't trust anybody in this offense to be consistent at wide receiver, besides maybe Brown. And I just think Boykin has way too much competition because then you also look at, Mark Andrews, for example, it's going to take targets as well. And all these wide receivers I mentioned. Boykin's just going to be a guy that's tough for me. I think J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is the guy to go for, considering ADP as well, of those three guys. Someone asked me about, my article about the Patriots from the end of June. Obviously, some things have changed. Literally, as I was writing that article, Cam Newton got signed. And then you have the opt-outs. Nothing necessarily too major, I think, at wide receiver. Granted, they weren't working with a whole lot to begin with. You still have a guy like Julian Edelman there. You still have a James White there. But I think a guy, not necessarily related to the opt-outs, but I think a guy that is sort of slept on a little bit is Damian Harris. Didn't play a whole lot. He was a healthy scratch a lot of games last season. But he's a guy, especially if Sony Michel isn't ready week 1. Damian Harris is the guy I think is most likely to be one who can take over and produce or fill that sort of role the best. I mean, he was a 3rd-round pick last year, and he did very well at Alabama. It's not like he's some nobody. But I think, especially given Michel's situation and inability to stay healthy, he's dealt with knee problems. Now he's got the foot issue. I think he's a guy. And the other part too is I think James White is going to see an uptick in targets. He's, what's a QB's best friend? It's a receiving running back. It's a guy you can trust out of the backfield in a pinch, and that's what he is. But he's not a guy you can trust to run 10, 15 times, a game. It's just that you can't. So I really think Damian Harris is a guy to look at. And a lot of people make a lot of noise about, the tight ends with the Patriots, Dalton Keene and Devin Asiasi. I think, again, pointing to it earlier, tight ends typically have a long time to produce a whole lot when it comes to fantasy, especially. But if there was one guy, I would think, it's the guy who didn't really get relied on as much in college. That's Dalton Keene. He's got a better athletic profile, and I think he was more efficient as well than Devin Asiasi. And he's also a guy that with all the going back to it before, the opt-outs with the fullback position, Keene's a guy that can be looked at for that. So he may already be getting on the field. Not that the fullback position is a moneymaker when it comes to fantasy, but you can't get points if you're not on the field. So I think Dalton Keene's another guy that could be looked at as well. There's just so much up for grabs, and a lot of it's going to come down to who's the guy week 1, which everybody expects to be Cam Newton. But what can Cam Newton do? Let's be honest. He's in a new system, and, he's coming off an injuries. He's had a couple seasons where he's dealt with injuries. So it'll be interesting to see. Not that he can't return to what he was doing before, but, that's sort of, it's a wild card. So that's the way I see it. And then Julian Edelman's a guy who may not have that Tom Brady connection, but you'll see him getting the most targets by far. And Keel Heary's a guy who could step up as well. He might be a guy that more sort of tailors towards what Cam Newton's style of play is like. He also relied on Steve Smith as well when he was down in Carolina. So maybe that helps, Julian Edelman a little bit more. But, that there's some guys that sort of step up a little bit, and then there's some that I think don't really make a whole lot of a change. There's a question about keep, trade, cut, Tyler Lockett, Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin. I'm going to approach this as redraft. And what I'll say is I think that the guy you would cut at those 3 in regards to redraft is Sutton. I think Sutton has the highest ADP or close to it. And let's address the elephant in the room. The Broncos went and they drafted Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler with their first 2 picks in the draft, or, their first and second round picks. Sutton did better when Sanders was in the lineup, yes, but you're still fighting with Jeudy, who's supposed to be, a true number 1. So that's what he's supposed to be drafted as. So what does that look like? And then they also have other players as well. They have a Noah Fant there. They have Melvin Gordon, who they brought in, who was, who's going to command some targets as well. And then they're also playing behind a really bad offensive line, which for a second-year QB that didn't get a whole lot of experience with Drew Lock, what does that look like for him? So I think just between the competition for targets and, even though we saw good things out of Drew Lock, still uncertainty around him, I'm going to cut him. I think there's a lot of hype around Terry McLaurin. And rightfully so. He did terrific last season, considering what he dealt with Case Keenum, and then Dwayne Haskins, and then going back, and then and then obviously the coaching change and whatnot. But I just a lot of it is going to ride on what Dwayne Haskins can do, and I'm not doubting him. I'm not saying he can't, but again, it's similar to Drew Lock, even to a bigger extent. What can we expect out of him? And there's just a whole lot of questions about that team. I think even though McLaurin could handle load as a number 1 receiver, The QB play, and then you have some guys who can come in and command some targets. AGG, for example. They keep propping up Logan Thomas, for example. If Darius Geis is healthy, can he command some looks? I'm going to probably trade on him because he's got a lot of hype behind him. And I think, it's going to be tough to really figure out what he can do and whatnot. So the keep would be Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett's a guy that year in and year out, I don't think gets enough respect. He's consistently well. He's number one target, even on a run-heavy offense, but he's still a number one guy. They didn't really add a whole lot in regards to guys who could take up targets. You have DJ Metcalf who will take on more, yes. But, I think it's a situation where, Lockett's just that number one guy. He's been consistent. Wilson is extremely efficient when he throws to him. So I can't see going wrong with him. And he just continues to seem to be a guy that's overlooked, I think. You have all these other guys that are propped up. Now, granted, I was burned by Tyler Lockett last year in Week 13, watching that game on Monday night against the Vikings when I needed 1.8 points to get to the playoffs and a big fat goose egg. Burned me a little bit. He's still a guy I trust, I think, to be able to be consistent, more so than anything. Someone asked me about having faith in Geis. I know we were just talking about that. I want to believe too, but the talent's there. Can he stay on the field? Can he be healthy? And that's a big question. And I don't know. And then even if he is, that offensive line, can you trust it? I don't know. I don't know. It's tough. So I think when you look at his ADP, which I see right around 6th round right now, I can't. You have a guy like Raheem Mostert who's getting picked later, Kareem Hunt. Those are a couple other guys I might look at that are getting picked after him, at running back over him, just because if he played on the field, if he was able to stay healthy, then maybe we can talk about. But then they also have a bunch of guys. They have Antonio Gibson there that they drafted. They picked up Peyton Barber. They got Adrian Pearson. There's a whole lot of people there. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm not buying guys at that price. I can't. David Johnson's another situation. I really think that he can do well. It just comes down to, can he be the number one? Because I think Duke Johnson deserves more, but he's not getting it. And David Johnson, obviously, he's got the contract. He came over. They obviously paid a hefty price for him for whatever reason, which included shipping off DeAndre Hopkins. And their offensive line's improving. So I think it's going to come down to health for David Johnson, but I think he's got a situation where he's got a better QB. Yes, Deshaun Watson's a better QB than Kyler Murray at this very moment. And, this is also a team that just lost DeAndre Hopkins. And that's 150, 160 targets, which, Johnson was making a lot of his points last year from receiving. I know I had him in a couple of redrafts. And then he tanked out due to injuries, and then Chase Edmonds stepping up, and then Kenyon Drake and whatnot. So I think for a guy like David Johnson, I'm willing to bet a little bit more on him. Because if you look at, his ADP, for example, he's getting picked in the late 4th, which for a lead back in that sort of offense, I don't mind as much, especially with the capital that they used to get him. I don't mind that when you have guys like David Montgomery, Mark Ingram, Marlon Mack, Todd Gurley, maybe Todd Gurley to a different extent, but those guys being drafted around him, I would probably bet a little bit more on David Johnson. So, yeah, I have a little more faith in him. High or low on Fournette? I'm not. I'm low on him. He's going to get the work. Yeah, he's got Chris Thompson coming in, which is going to eat into his targets, but he's just not an efficient guy. He has a lot of volume. He had one healthy season. I can't trust him. I can't. He's like my running back 3 or something. I can't. You have a guy like Austin Eckler and Kenyon Drake and Chris Carson, based off what I'm looking at, being picked ADP after him. No way. No way. I take any of those guys over him, even if they may not get the same amount of work. Fournette's just so inefficient. And while he may get the work, how many touchdowns is he going to score in that type of offense? They have a horrible defense, and means that game script wise, they're not going to be able to run the ball as much as they like. And then, it's just a situation where there are going to be guys that could eat into it a little bit. And could he be healthy? So I just, for that sort of draft capital, I can't buy into him. I can't. I really can't. Hopefully it dips a little bit, maybe. But I can't. Looking here at some of the other questions, someone asked me about, the receiving core of the Texans, since we're on that topic about the Texans. I don't, you can't replace DeAndre Hopkins. You can't. But, I think that they've done a decent enough job being able to go after and try to help replace it the best they can. I think a guy like, I think a guy like Randall Cobb is a guy that can be trustworthy. He did pretty well last season in Dallas, for example. So, I don't mind, him a little bit. Obviously the propped up guy is Will Fuller. I love Will Fuller. I loved him coming out of Notre Dame, but he's been struggling to stay healthy, and that's a big thing. That's a big thing, so it'll be. I don't know. I think, there's some value there. I think with Will Fuller, he's getting a little bit of a prop up right now. If you look at him, he's getting picked in the 8th round. And right around where Brandon Cooks is. Brandon Cooks is another guy. He's a guy I think can absolutely thrive, but his health scares me. And it's the same sort of thing a little bit with it's the same thing a little bit with Will Fuller. Both of these guys are players that if they stay healthy, they can produce. But can they? Brandon Cooks has a dangerous injury history. And he's one hit away from, despite what he says, 7 concussions is a lot. But he was traded to be their number 1 guy. And I think between him and Will Fuller, one of them is going to stand out. And it might just come down to whoever's going to be the healthiest and who's going to be on the field the most. Cobb is okay. The tight end position, they have Darren Fells there, who had a mini breakout. Doesn't take a whole lot to be able to do well as a tight end or sneak into that low end tight end 1, which he did. But I really think that, with those ADPs around the 8th, it looks like the 8th round in half PPRs for Cooks and Fuller, I wouldn't mind one or the other. If I had to pick, I'm going to go with the guy that has terrific numbers when Deshaun Watson's starting him. That's Will Fuller. Are we buying Robert Woods more than Kupp? Yeah, Robert Woods is, I think, in the same boat as Tyler Lockett. He's just a guy that year after year just doesn't get the respect he should. I don't. Robert Woods is being picked in the 5th round right now. Cooper Kupp is being picked in the 3rd round. Cooper Kupp was terrific the first few weeks. I think he was like the wide receiver 3. But he fell off as they sort of game planned a little bit differently, as they sort of changed their offense a little bit and featured more tight ends. That's why you saw Higbee sort of break out a little bit. So Kupp is more of a hit and miss guy. The biggest thing for Robert Woods is he going to be able to score a touchdown? I think he had 2 touchdowns last year. But if there's a 2-round difference between them, I'm absolutely going Robert Woods here. He's old reliable. He is. And this is a team that, I don't see it changing a whole lot from what it was last year or towards the end of the season. I think you're going to see a lot more Higbee, Gerald Everett, looks. And someone's going to bite the bullet for it. And I think it's going to be Kupp more than anything. Obviously, you have a guy like Josh Reynolds behind them, Van Jefferson, they drafted in the 2nd round. That's going to sort of myriad the situation a little bit. But if I had to pick between one of those 2 guys, relative to ADP cost, I'm going with Robert Woods all day. 2-round difference, without a doubt. Looking at some of the other questions, most overrated draft picks that are going in the first 2 rounds that you wouldn't take until round 4 or later. I don't know about that, but, I'm a big proponent, and so are a lot of people, that you don't draft a QB early in a 1 QB league. And I look at just ADP data, and Mahomes and Lamar Jackson are both getting picked in the 2nd round. They're valuable, don't get me wrong, but I think I think just, the standard deviation between one QB and the next is a lot different than between one running back and the other sometimes, or one wide receiver and the other. So I can't buy on drafting a QB that early unless like every other player that's been picked is much better, which I'm not sure I see. So those are guys I'm not really banking on a whole lot. I know I talked about Leonard Fournette. He's getting drafted around the end of the second round. He's another guy. I would say. And then, this might be a hot take. I don't know. I think some people would probably agree with me. Mike Evans. Mike Evans getting picked around the end of the second round. Round pick 22 in a 12-team league. And I can't. I really think Jameis Winston was still there. We're having a totally different conversation. But he's not there. And Tom Brady, don't get me wrong, Tom Brady is a terrific QB. And he's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. He's 43 years old. Jameis Winston I think he fit in perfectly. He's the ideal. He's like the Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick not as much, but those guys are not afraid to take shots down the field regardless of what happens. We saw that with Jameis Winston last year. 30 interceptions, but he was still like QB5 or something like that in fantasy. But I think, is Brady going to be more efficient? Yeah. Is Brady reinvigorated? Yeah. He's got a chip on his shoulder. Yeah. But Mike Evans was also a guy that was kind of hot and cold too. He would have a game where he had 30 points and then he would drop off and have 0 points. So he was already a guy that's kind of scary a little bit. And, with the downgrade, yes, it's a downgrade in regards to fantasy. At QB, I can't buy him. I think Godwin fits his style of play a little bit more. And I know people have talked about, well, Mike Evans is more like Randy Moss. Yeah, but Randy Moss was 12 years ago. Brady was a totally different QB. You can say it all you want. Father Time catches up with the best of us. Just don't think Tom Brady's going to be the same guy in 2020 as he was in 2018, for example, 2017. I think, he'll still play well. He'll be a low-end QB1, high-end QB2. Just don't see him being able to put up the same numbers that we saw, with him, with Winston at QB. I just don't. So Mike Evans is not a guy I'm sold on necessarily. I love this question. Chubb versus Mixon. I love Nick Chubb. I do. I've loved him ever since he came out of Georgia. I was his biggest fan when I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but the Browns traded the running back that sort of paved the way for Chubb to take over. I own him in like 80% of my dynasty leagues. I love him. I do. I have a crush on Nick Chubb. But Joe Mixon is obviously an interesting guy because he sort of he was already a guy that had high hopes. He kind of fell flat at the beginning of the year, and then sort of picked up as the season went on. And it was kind of like the opposite for Nick Chubb, for different reasons. Joe Mixon, obviously the Bengals as a whole have some dynamics changed. They're hopefully getting Jonah Williams back at left tackle. He was their first round draft pick in 2019. Didn't play at all. That's a boon if he can come back and play well. And then for some reason, there's this guy named Joe Burrow who is lighting up Cincinnati. Number 1 draft pick, Heisman Trophy winner, national champion. High hopes for him, and it's kind of a boost to everybody else, and including Joe Mixon. Compared to what they had last season between Andy Dalton and Ryan Finley. So, there's different dynamics because I think both teams' outlooks have changed for the better. But then, the big thing for Nick Chubb is you got Kareem Hunt there. And I get it. Kareem Hunt is a guy that there was a clear split in fantasy production for Nick Chubb. And when Kareem Hunt came off suspension. And he's still there, yeah. But I think that the changes in offensive line, because Nick Chubb still got a lot of touches within the 5-yard line in the red zone, just couldn't convert them. And some of it's his fault, yes. But I think a lot of it had to do with the offensive line play. You're going to see a big improvement, and I think that's going to help him. Kareem Hunt is still a guy that's taking away any targets that he may have, or most of them, which sucks. And Joe Mixon is a guy that's pretty much a clear workhorse. You have Gio Bernard there, but he's clearly the veteran, second stringer who you can rely on in a way. So as painful as it is for me to hear and say how much I love Nick Chubb, not only as a football player, but as a fantasy, asset, I have to say Joe Mixon. I do. You hope that after the season, Kareem Hunt is signs a big contract, potentially with another team and becomes a number one somewhere else, and Nick Chubb can regain his workhorse like volume. But Kareem Hunt is a huge thorn in Nick Chubb's side when it comes to his fantasy production, and for that I have to say Joe Mixon at between the two of them. That's a great question. Everybody's looking for the Patrick Mahomes of 2019 or 2018, the Lamar Jackson of 2019. And can I say Deshaun Watson? Not really. He's the fourth. He's QB4 in regards to ADP. But I think there are a couple of guys that kind of stand out to me. I think Daniel Jones is a guy that he's sort of like a Josh Allen in a way. He's a guy that doesn't necessarily look the best on the field and on film. He gets fantasy points. He runs the ball. And I think with, them going and getting Andrew Thomas at left tackle, even with Nate Solder opting out, I get it. I think their offensive line improves. You get Saquon Barkley back, hopefully healthy, because he was hurt, during Daniel Jones' rookie season. And then they dealt with a whole bunch of injuries to Sterling Shepard and to Evan Ingram. Good, skill player, group. If they all stay healthy, Barkley, Ingram, Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, who dealt with some suspension as well. I really think Daniel Jones could be, a guy that could be like a low end QB1, or even better. He could have like a Josh Allen sort of impact. Jones is being picked as the 13th QB, so right outside of QB1 in 12 team leagues. But I really think he's a guy that can, step up. Matt Ryan's another one. I know he's getting picked, it looks like 7th, but he was injured. But before that, he was doing really well, I think. And they bring, they upgrade their running back room, even with Todd Gurley. They go and I don't know if it's an upgrade, but Hayden Hurst is not a bad replacement for Austin Hooper. And you have Julio Jones. You have Calvin Ridley, who's expected to take another step up in 2020. So, I think he's another guy potentially. If we're looking like deep sleeper, Ryan Tannehill. As I talked about earlier, Ryan Tannehill was like the QB 3 or something like that, like efficiency wise when he took over. He's getting drafted as QB 19 right now. That's crazy. And again, it goes back to the whole, run first team. Ryan Tannehill balled out last year. Whatever his time was in Miami, he did a whole lot better, with Tennessee. So I really think, I know until the playoffs, but I think that was just more game planning around, they listen, they made it to the AFC Championship, and kudos to them. But I don't think it's indicative of how they're going to approach the season. I don't. And I think just Ryan Tannehill, if he's going to run for 10 touchdowns this season. I don't care. I'll say it right now. Maybe not 10, but I think you give him a whole season in that offense, with Arthur Smith doing a lot of great things there. And I think Tannehill is going to be a QB1 this year. So he's a no-brainer for me as well. Bruce Arians recently stated that Ronald Jones is the main guy in the backfield. Yeah, he said that last year too, in October, November, and then he only gave him a 50% snap share. I don't trust Bruce Arians. I don't. I love him as a coach, as a personality. I don't trust him. So it doesn't really change a whole lot because he said the same thing last year and didn't do crap. I'm not touching that Buccaneers backfield. I can't. I won't. Worth it to me. Aren't. So I'm totally out on Malcolm. In the Jets because of Gase. Now, we're working on something right now for talking about Le'Veon Bell. I hope to have out in a couple days for Gridiron experts. And Le'Veon Bell was really bad last year. It was really bad, like efficiency wise. He got the volume and he did okay. You know, he had I think over 1,200 yards in scrimmage. He was really bad. He did poor, like really, really bad. Not buying him in his ADP. I won't. Gase sucks. I dare you to find somebody out there that tells me Gase is a good NFL head coach, because he's not. He's just not. Even as offensive coordinator, he's been sucking lately. So it definitely puts a damper into it. Darnold did really, I think he did over the second half of when he really came back from mono. I think he was like QB8 in efficiency or like per week or something like that. He did pretty well. I wouldn't mind him as like a QB2, honestly. He's not a guy that I feel confident having him in QB1 redraft. But there are a couple of guys. Herndon is a guy that but he's sort of like that. Almost like, you know, the guys that get he's almost like the Christine Michael of tight ends. He has flashes, but then for one reason or another, he never comes through. Always hope he will. Don't think he does. Do like Denzel Mims, though. I really like him a lot. I don't know how I feel about him in his offense, but I like Denzel Mims. He did really well at Baylor. He's a guy I wouldn't mind a little bit. You know, this is a Jets team that just traded away their best defensive player. Well, are they going to have to pass the ball more? Probably. So, you know, it puts them in a situation where they're going to have to pass it more. And Gase doesn't even trust Bell. He didn't even want to sign him. So I can't trust him to utilize Bell correctly, even if they have made upgrades to their offensive line. But, you know, Denzel Mims, it doesn't even look like he's being – I'm looking at ADP right now, and it's coming up blank. I don't even think he's getting picked like the top 200. I wouldn't mind him. That's a really good dart play, I think. I think he could be like a Darius Slayton guy. Because of injuries necessarily, but they really have nobody there. They don't. They don't have anybody that they can throw to. Well, they didn't even with Robbie Anderson there. I kind of like Rashad Berryman too. Actually, I think it's not because I trust them to be, you know, week in and week out starters, but I think they're both just values with how low they're being drafted. A team that's going to have to pass a lot, and I trust Sam Darnold. I think I'll just talk about Trevor Lawrence being, you know, they're tanking for Trevor Lawrence next year. You got a franchise QB already, and Sam Darnold, you're pulling, you're giving up too quickly on him, I think. I wouldn't mind a guy like Mims or Perryman as some bench play. Nobody I trust as a starter. You can go and draft Bell at some point; he'll be worth it because he'll get the volume, like Fournette. But you also have a guy like Perrine who got drafted, who, you know, he's a guy that can really touch it, you know, can take some touches as well. So, I mean, yeah, sure, absolutely. At their ADP, I wouldn't mind it at all. Sanders. I love Miles Sanders. I do. So I feel many ways about Miles Sanders. I'm all in on Miles Sanders. I'm all in on him this year. There's been talk about, you know, do the Eagles, does Doug Pearson really, you know, utilize him as a lead back, as a bell cow? Absolutely. He's just so awesome. I think he's such an impact player. You know, he's going to be a value play to me, no matter where his ADP is. I think the sky's the ceiling. The sky's the limit, I should say. You know, I have no doubts about Miles Sanders this year. If he stays healthy, no doubt in my mind he could finish top half of running, you know, high end running back one. even doubt in my mind. Another guy I would for Kenyon Drake. I like Chase Edmonds. I like Eno Benjamin. You know he's a 7th round pick, guys. Kenyon Drake is another guy I'm all in on. Horrific in that offense. And yeah, DeAndre Hopkins will take some targets, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he will. He will. But guy who is going to be a bell cow. He's going to be. He's on a 1-year contract. And he fits this offense so well. He does. And they made some minor improvements to the offensive line, which is only going to benefit him more. And this is a team that's going to just rack up points. I love Kenyon Drake. I love Miles Sanders. Those are two guys, two running backs that I'm all in on. Is Parker, because he has the toughest strength of schedule, should we avoid him? Yeah, I mean, you look at the splits between when Preston Williams was on the field and when he wasn't. Devontae Parker wasn't doing that well. He was all right, but he really took off when Preston Williams got hurt. I think, if you have a situation where, Preston Williams is healthy and on the field, he's not going to be a guy that I can bank on at his ADP. Just trusting him to do that. I mean, he's kind of a value a little bit. He's getting picked in the 7th round. So maybe I take that back a little bit, but you can't trust him to be a guy that be able to produce those wide receiver 1 numbers every week that he was when Preston Williams got hurt. He could be a decent wide receiver 2 when we talk about the guys that, sort of opted out and they need somebody to throw to. But I actually don't mind him now that I think about it a little bit more and I look at it. He's getting picked in the 7th round, in front of guys like Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Julian Edelman. Yeah, I would feel better about him than the other ones. No, there's just nobody worth it. There's no other Dolphins wide receivers that are worth it. There's just so much unproven. I know that there's some people that propped up Isaiah Ford, but you're not going to have to compete to get him. Besides Preston Williams and Devontae Parker, there are no other guys I would feel slightest confident could actually be fantasy relevant, wide receiver wise. So that's just my opinion on it. Not a problem at all. I want to see if there's any others I didn't mention. Aaron Jones's production, does he live up to his current ADP? I mean, so Aaron Jones is getting picked top of the 2nd round over guys like Miles Sanders, Austin Eckler, Kenyon Drake, Chris Carson. I like Aaron Jones. Don't get me wrong. I can't trust him at that ADP. I can't. Williams was still doing some stuff even when he was healthy, and then you add in a guy like AJ Dillon, who he's not a 3-down back. I don't think he's a guy that can definitely command a lot of goal line touches. Which Aaron Jones is the percentage of points that he got off of touchdowns was staggering. Take away a couple of those touchdowns, yikes! And don't get me wrong, I love Aaron Jones. I did. I was pounding the table for him when he got drafted, and hoping he gets used more. But I can't trust him at the ADP. He's getting picked almost in the 1st round. Can you really trust him to be your top pick and lead you to a championship? I don't feel that way. I don't. So, and if you're getting drafted ahead of Miles Sanders, then no. But yeah, let me before I wrap up here, I just want to see if there's any other questions. I think there's only like 1 or 2 more that there were. So I want to see if I can try to answer those. I'm trying to answer as many as I can for you guys. This is a good one. When you make an initial trade offer, do you offer something that you think they would accept, or make the trade slightly in your favor and then negotiate from there? So Dom, not that I'm sure that you have great methods for it. I don't make it a secret that my first offer is never going to be my best offer. It's never going to be. Do I try to make it seem like it's not outlandish? Yeah. But never. It's almost like negotiating salary. You never start with the salary you want. You start with something that's way above it, and then you negotiate down to what you actually want it to be. That's sort of the same way I approach it here as well. I would never, ever make my first offer my best offer. I won't. I can't. And hey, there are some people that just have different values in players than you do. And if they take that first offer, by all means. But even if they don't, you have to negotiate. You're going to hopefully get down to a point where you're comfortable with it anyway. So never, ever going to make my first offer my best one. Nope, never. Never will. So I love that question. I love it. I love it. I will never, I'll never make my first offer my best offer. That's just poor fantasy football ownership, I think, personally. So, but that looks like that's really everything. So, guys, I really appreciate you guys taking an hour to talk with me. I have no problem talking for an hour or 2 hours or whatever. So I appreciate you guys sitting through that and still continuing to send me questions and encouraging me to talk more. I really appreciate it. You guys had some great questions. You guys have been a great audience. And, I wish everybody the best when it comes to, this fantasy football season. Fingers crossed that we get through a whole season and, we're able to enjoy it all as if it was last year and hopefully help take away a little bit from what everything is going on. But yeah, so, if you have any questions though, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Twitter. DMoreNFL is my Twitter handle. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Be on the lookout this season, as I'll be writing a lot for Gridiron Experts and for Pro Football Network. Pro Football Network is going to be really interesting to see because I'm going to be looking at a lot of analytics side of it and how it relates to football. And they've done some terrific stuff over there, so it's going to be really great to see. But yeah, guys, listen, I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and I'm always a tweet or a DM away if you have any questions at all.